Amazing Spider-Man 2, released in 2004. Did this change again? So tired of the set being inconsistent. As long as it doesn't change back when I go to footage that I've already shot. I don't see the odds of that happening. Anyway, released in 2014, Amazing Spider-Man 2 follows the title character as he continues his superhero work, while also dealing with a changing relationship with his girlfriend and aunt, also his best friend's dying, also there's this new supervillain named Electro in town, and not to mention he's also trying to find out the secrets of his father's past, and I'm starting to think I might have spotted the major flaw in this film. But another problem actually came about in 2012. See, the Avengers made bank. It made a lot of money, and it also showed that cinematic universes could be very profitable. Emphasis on the word could. So studios started clamoring to make their own. DC in 2016, Universal in 2017 with the Monster franchise, which seems to have kind of faded out. Also, Legendary have been doing their own with the Godzilla license, and Columbia Pictures decided to make their own out of the characters that they own from Marvel related to Spider-Man. And why not? I mean, many of these characters have had their own solo series in the past, and they could make way for a lot of possible storytelling, even beyond the superhero genre. This also leads to something of a cinematic universe effect, where the audience becomes aware of the studio's intention to milk a license, and it comes across as greedy and egotistical that they could even replicate the work of the MCU. It's like when you're watching a movie like this and they start teasing future films. Now, this could be seen as just regular old sequel baiting, but it takes on an entirely different connotation when we're talking about an extended universe. We'll cover this a bit later, but let's start digging into this mess, shall we? The villains are a real mixed bag. The main one is Electro, played by Jamie Foxx, who's been reworked from his comic book origins as some asshole that got superpowers and thought, hey, why do I just make a book atlas? To a mentally unstable electrician who goes off the deep end after science makes him superpowered, like most Marvel villains, really. Especially Spider-Man's villains. However, his civilian identity looks like he stepped out of a living colour sketch more than a Spider-Man character. I mean, after he goes full villain, he's pretty badass, but his transition is extremely rushed. Like, he's just walking along and suddenly he crashes into Spider-Man and now he's obsessed with him, and then he gets supervillain powers in a matter of days, and then after that he just kind of goes through all these stages of guilt and just boom, supervillain. Also, what was with this origin? I mean, he grabs all the cables and is electrocuted. Fair enough, I mean that's how the original got his powers. He was working on power lines, he was struck by lightning, and then he falls into a tank of electric eels and they all electrocute him. It's like, what is with this character origin? This feels more like the origin you'd see in a superhero spoof film than an actual superhero film, except they put it into an actual superhero film and you're supposed to take it seriously. Seriously, if you splice David Alan Gray into these scenes with Jamie Foxx and the water, you could have a living colour sketch here.
About me and stuff, because you was religious last night, because you kept going, oh God, oh yeah, and I said, hey, word up.
Let's find Marshall Bill when you need him. And if you got all those references, you're officially cool. Then we have the Green Goblin, Harry Osborn, a childhood friend of Spider-Man who's dying of a disease that drives him to extremes and eventually into becoming a crazy supervillain. As you do. Dane DeHaan, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, really sells the character's torment and desperation, but his storyline fighting with everything else going on that it doesn't get the time it needs. And we're also mixed on the Goblin's look. On one hand, it's a mess and looks really silly, but on the other hand, it does do a great job of showing his physical transformation to match his broken mental state. And that smile is beyond creepy. Though I have to say, probably the best Goblin design we've had in a movie yet. Really think about that. His competition so far has been a rejected Power Ranger villain and a rejected Power Ranger. Seriously, what the hell's with that hoverboard thing? At the very least, this looks like a Goblin. I gotta say, it was extremely lucky that the only serum that could save Harry's life also came with its own high-tech battlesuit that even has its own airborne glider. Wow, they have all of the best toys in Spin-Off Bunker. And then there's the Rhino. Or lack thereof. Seriously, he shows up at the beginning out of costume in a chase scene, but he doesn't in the Rhino suit until the very end, and even then, it's not for an actual fight scene. Why not make the opening scene against the Rhino? He's robbed a truck and now he's running through the street to escape the police. You can still have the high-speed chase, just put him in the Rhino suit. I mean, if you didn't want to make him a big thing, fair enough. I mean, it's the Rhino. He's usually the butt of a lot of jokes. Admittedly, he's had a bit of a reformation in the last couple of years, but that's a different thing entirely. But they made it like a big part of the advertising that he was going to be in this film, so why push for something that's barely in it? And why cast him with Paul Giamatti? If it's a role this small, why have this name actor in this role? Seriously, it's barely a role. Sure, change your villain all you want, but don't waste Paul Giamatti's time. These are pretty lame villains. I will give it that, at the very least, there's still things I love about them. Like, I do like Dehan's performance. I also like Elektra when he's actually a bad guy. And when Rhino's actually being Rhino, it's pretty awesome, but there's way too much dragging all of them down. But the big positive I can say, still better than Spider-Man 3's Venom. And the Green Goblin. Again, that film did kind of bounce it out by having an awesome Sandman. So, if the 3 villains weren't a big enough indication, I'll spell out for you that there is too much going on in this. I mean, we've got 2.5 villains, a hero's relationship with his girlfriend, and a corporate conspiracy involving Peter's super scientist parents. Could be dumber. Could have made them secret agents. That's not a joke, they were secret agents in the comics, look it up. And yet that revelation still wasn't as dumb as the Clone Saga. Plus, they're setting up like the next 3 movies, because like I said, Avengers made a lot of money and we need to miss the point of how it worked. See, when Batman Returns had 2 villains, it compensated by tying the hero's story into the character of Catwoman, so you had less storylines to focus on. Or in Batman Forever, where one is the main threat and the others basically just muscle with a name that we recognize. I don't like how Two-Face was treated in that film, but at the same time, it led to a more cohesive plot. With multiple villains, you do have to make concessions about what your audience has patience for. See, a side effect of having a cluttered story is a total lack of flow. The film just keeps jumping from plotline to plotline whenever it's convenient. I mean, I have relationship problems. Wait, now I have to stop a supervillain. No time to relax. I have to go and make sure that my best friend doesn't become another supervillain. Now I'm comforting my aunt about me trying to find the truth about my super scientist dad. Hey, did I choke on my best friend? Oh shit, he turned into a supervillain. Guess I should have caught that! Now this is a pretty accurate picture of how Peter's life is a never-ending clown show of misery and broken promises, but for a movie, you really do have to sort out a cohesive plot. This feels more like a first draft that hasn't properly been vetted. There's no real plot holes to speak of, no like logical paradoxes contradicting themselves, but rather it feels like these stories aren't given enough time to develop or really time to tie in with each other. This can lead to a 2.5-hour film feeling way longer than it really is, and then your audience starts to lose interest. Now let's get into the good stuff about this. Peter Parker is awesome, once again played by Andrew Garfield, and is now a more experienced hero. His dealings with guilt regarding the people who die under his care are of a particular note. His intelligence is also a great focus, and complement the character well while paying homage to his comic book roots. But he's also shown to be a more caring hero, stopping to be nice to a guy that he just saved, helping a kid with bullies, and even walking him home, to noticing that a villain isn't in his right mind and trying to help calm him down rather than resorting to fighting. You never see that in a superhero film. This hero never tries to reason with the guy, they usually just go for the knockout punch. He's also willing to stand up to the Rhino and crack jokes, even during his worst moments, without giving away what actually happens in this movie. I wouldn't be surprised if that mask is hiding a lot of tears in this scene. This is worth a discussion in of itself, but let's get on before I ruin everything else. You have to admit, putting his own feelings aside to try and make other people feel safe is a bit more heroic than, say, setting a clown on fire. Seriously, what the actual hell, Keaton? The romance is once again really well done, dealing with the ups and downs while again having great chemistry. Emma Stone once again shows that Gwen Stacy is not just arm candy in these films by helping Peter out with her own expertise. Considering the actors were actually going out at the time of this, it's no surprise that they get on well on screen. And the way it ends made me cry in the cinema. I swear to God. Truth be told, I was in a pretty shitty place emotionally on that day, but it still manages to get to me even while I was writing this review. But how is it that an action-based superhero film, the best part is the romance? This movie is either doing something incredibly well or something incredibly wrong. Probably both. What is really good is the action. It's once again awesome, shot well, involving a lot of movement, and has a decent variety, from a chase scene to the villain battles, and especially a scene at Times Square where time slows down and you get to see every thought process. And then you have the climax of the clock tower, which again is really awesome. Not only do you have the very real threat of the love interest dying, but it's also got this moody atmosphere and the closeness is used to its advantage. Usually with these superhero films we use like these big open fights, but here it's very close, and as a result it feels much more brutal and personal. The music is a weird thing for me to comment on. I don't usually point out the soundtrack, but I really like how it's used in this, especially Electro's theme, which starts off quirky before he actually gets his powers, but it keeps the same note sequence when he's Electro, except now it's changed up so it's showing his change and it's deepened up around him. And even has my favourite use of dubstep ever. And this is from someone who hates dubstep. Seriously, I can't stand it. The Spider-Man theme isn't as classic as the Danny Elfman one, but it really does get me amped. Also, how is it that this guy wrote a better Superman song for the Spider-Man film than he did for the actual Superman? And for me to sit up and pay attention, that's a huge compliment. Also, the song in the credits.
And everybody know the story of David and Goliath, but this is bigger than triumph. This is for the warrior, this is for you and I.
This is still stuck on my goddamn head.
And everybody know the story.
Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a cluttered mess. I'm a pretty biased source because I love the first film so much, and this version of the character especially, but even I have to acknowledge that this film was just a jumbled mess of good ideas with no cohesive flow. There's so much that I love about this film though, that it frustrates me more. Like, if this was just a bad film, that'd be fine, like I wouldn't like it, but at the very least I could have a strong opinion of it, but it's like, every time I get annoyed by this film, I remember something I love, and weirdly enough, the only time I don't get annoyed by this film is when I'm actually watching it, and all these things that I hated just kind of boil away, and I enjoy myself, and it just annoys me that this film couldn't have gotten its act together, because there's so much here that works, there's so much that should have worked, and they just dropped the ball. They dropped the ball. They just shoved so much into this movie, and at the same time felt like they were trying to make 3 more films off the back of it. At the very least, the setups didn't feel like that out of place. Like, it wasn't as distracting as saying Batman vs Superman, where the plot just kind of derails so Wonder Woman can look at some DVD extras. But at the same time, it gives these lines a very different context when you know what they wanted to do with the character.
What is all this stuff? The future.
Suddenly this doesn't sound like a line hinting at what they could be doing in Amazing Spider-Man 3, and instead feels like a studio executive pitching what the next spin-offs could be. And I think the big problem is that Sony was just so outspoken and pushed so hard for this expanded universe that it really did affect our perceptions, that we couldn't look past what they were trying to do. It's a really big problem, and thankfully the MCU has found a way to get past that. It did stumble a little bit with Iron Man 2, but after that it kept like the tie-ins to the post-credit scene and everything else was self-contained. But this doesn't really feel like it is. The result is it makes a good film feel like a giant advert for another film. But let's break this down. So, the villain sucked, and the plot was a mess. But it had a great hero, it had a great romance, and it also had some kick-ass action, so all in all, it's a 6 out of 10. Many of you are probably saying, that's a really generous score, and, you know, maybe it is. I'm not going to apologize for liking the parts I like, but I do need to acknowledge the parts that do suck and why a lot of people really don't like this film. Maybe you think that it should be given a 4 out of 10 or a 5 out of 10, hell, maybe a 0 out of 10 because it just messed everything up for you, but if I lied about the parts that I actually like to make you feel better about hating this movie, I'd be a shitty critic, and you shouldn't watch me if I did that. It's a real shame that this series got canned before we can really explore the ideas that presented at the end of this movie. Like, there was a great setup to a Clone Saga film here. Like, done well. I really feel like we really haven't seen that storyline really tackled well yet. But I guess we're just not going to be able to get to do that now. This movie bombed, and Sony let Marvel do what they wanted with the Spider-Man character, and they ended up rebooting it. And it's a great reboot, it's a fantastic reboot, and I love that version of the character. He's not like quite Garfield's level, I don't think, but at the same time, he's a really awesome version of the character. It's just a shame what we lost to get him. Though maybe it was a good thing, because from the way everything sounded, Sony just wanted to make an entire army of Spider-Man spin-offs, from Spider-Man 2099 to an Aunt May spin-off was an apparent threat at one point. They tried again with Venom, and that had mixed results. Like, it was an okay movie, but like you can't really see like a multiverse being spun off from it. And they did feel like they had better success with Enter the Spider-Verse. That does raise a lot of possibilities for solo films. Not just the characters introduced, but other Spider-Verse like spin-off things are a potential there. And even then, if with the same quality that that film was, then more power to them. But their first attempt really did miss the mark. And now I've done shitting on a film that I like, it's time to talk a bit of spoilers. So if you want to avoid spoilers, now's your time. I've already given it my score. Take care now, bye bye then. For everyone else, let's talk about how awesome the ending is. If the rest of the film had been like this ending, I would have had no complaints at all. Starting with when Goblin realizes who Spider-Man is. The way he looks at Peter, looks at Gwen, and that smile as he puts it together. I mean, can you show me a better way of a supervillain discovering Spider-Man's identity? Okay, point taken. But the fight I've already covered, which transitions into the fall. This is one of the most iconic moments in Spider-Man history, when Gwen Stacy is dropped by the Green Goblin and he tries to catch her. It's been replicated so many times, but the way that this is shot just really builds up the tragedy. How the music slows down and the way that the rev seems to like be a hand reaching for it. It's so cheesy, but God help me, I love it. And that harsh crack, it gives me chills every single time. What follows is just Spider-Man grieving. The music is minimal, and Garfield really sells this performance as we see how long he's quit being Spider-Man, because he just is still grieving. And the only one who can pull him out of this funk is Aunt May.
Been putting some of Ben's stuff in boxes, and it's so funny, the heavier the box gets, the lighter I feel.
Throwing his stuff away?
I couldn't do that. It's part of me. I'm just finding a better place for it. I'm gonna take one last look, and I'm gonna put it where it belongs.
But there will be dark days ahead of us, too. There will be days where you feel all alone. And that's when hope is needed most. No matter how buried it gets, or how lost you feel, you must promise me that you will hold on to hope.
This idea of hope in the worst possible circumstances should have been the core of the film. It should have been the focus of everything else. The villains and every event surrounding them should have been built around this message. If it had been, then I would defend it against anyone who spoke out about it. And that's one of the reasons why this movie frustrates me. That this gem is just lost in everything else. And it's a real shame, because once again, this is another film that I have a very deep connection to. If you've seen my recent update video on my hiatus, you'll know that I've had issues in the past. And when I saw this movie, it was at exactly the right time that I needed to hear those words. I saw it when I was stuck in a job that I was really starting to hate. My work outside of that was progressing very slowly. Playing devil's advocate had just gone completely off the rails, because I was constantly driving from here to Wales to record with Chris, coming home and spending all day editing, only to have YouTube strike it and then take it down almost immediately. It just felt like I was just breaking under the strain of everything that was going on. And this is the movie that I saw to make myself feel better. And it's that final message of hope in our darkest moments really spoke to me when I really needed it the most. So what does Spider-Man do with this information? He puts on his mask, confronts the Rhino, and makes jokes. Now, I've heard people criticize the scene, saying that this is a really, really bad time to have this. Like, it completely contradicts everything else that we've seen so far. Well, you're wrong. This is exactly who Spider-Man is. He doesn't tell jokes to entertain an audience. He does it because he's scared, because he's sad, because of everything else he has going on in his life, and he needs to hide that fear. If you want to see an entire show which handled this extremely well, I highly recommend the show My Hero Academia. The character in that, All Might, is basically that universe's version of Superman. He's the strongest, most powerful superhero, and he's always got a smile on his face. But what people don't see is how injured he is, how weak he is, how broken he is. That smile is what people need to see. They need to see him smiling to let them know that everything is going to be fine. That's why this scene is so important. That's why he's joking. Because the people watching him need to hear those jokes. So, that's why I really like the ending of this film. And hopefully it put into context why the rest of the film irritates me so much. Well, I think there's only one thing that we can take solace in, is that it was seriously still better than Spider-Man 3. Oh, I was irritated by how close this film was, but I wasn't downright embarrassed by it. And for as rushed as all these villains were, they are Doc Ock and the Vulture ahead of 70s show Venom. Seriously, put your face back on! However, since the cameo in Amazing Spider-Man 2 was pretty weak, kind of a metaphor for the entire film, I'll use one from Spider-Man 3 because it's a lot better and actually kind of appropriate to what I just talked about. Take care now. Bye-bye then.
You know, I guess one person can make a difference. Enough said.